The Navy did not come to the airport for an inspection. They came looking for one struggling single father. The announcement spread through Terminal B faster than any boarding call ever could. Travelers stopped walking. Airline employees exchanged confused glances. Even the security officers near the main entrance seemed unsure what was happening. Outside the massive glass windows of Harbor City International Airport, a line of dark government vehicles rolled slowly toward a restricted section near the executive terminal. Their polished surfaces reflected the gray morning sky. Men and women in Navy uniforms stepped out with calm precision. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody appeared rushed. Yet their presence carried the kind of authority that made entire rooms pay attention. Near Gate 18, a customer service manager adjusted his tie and hurried toward the arriving officers. "Can I help you?" he asked. A senior officer glanced at a folder in his hands. "We are looking for Daniel Carter." The manager blinked. "Daniel Carter? That is correct. The maintenance technician?" The officer nodded once. "Where can we find him?" For a moment, the manager simply stared. Around them, several airport employees had already begun listening. A baggage supervisor lowered his coffee cup. A gate agent paused in the middle of a conversation. Even a janitor stopped pushing his cart. The officer repeated the question. "Where is Daniel Carter?" The manager finally found his voice. "Why would the Navy be looking for Daniel?" The officer's expression softened slightly. "Because someone very important wishes to thank him." A ripple of whispers moved through the terminal. "Thank him? Daniel Carter?" Nobody understood. Daniel was known throughout the airport. Most people liked him. Some admired him. Many felt sorry for him. He worked harder than almost anyone else in the building. Long shifts, weekend shifts, holiday shifts, whatever was available. Yet despite all those hours, life never seemed to get easier for him. He drove an aging pickup truck with more than 200,000 miles on it. He packed his own lunches. He never complained. And every afternoon, without fail, he called his 10-year-old daughter during his break. That was Daniel Carter. Nothing about him suggested he would ever become the center of a military search. The senior officer looked around the terminal. "We can wait." The manager nodded slowly. "I think you are going to have to." The airport grew quieter with every passing minute. Curious employees gathered near windows overlooking the executive entrance. Travelers began taking photographs. Rumors multiplied. Some claimed Daniel had once served in the military. Others suggested he had saved someone's life. One person even wondered if there had been a mistake. Through it all, the officers remained calm, patient, respectful, as though they already knew exactly how this story would end. Across the airport, several floors below the main concourse, Daniel Carter knew nothing about any of it. At that moment, he was repairing a baggage conveyor system that had jammed shortly after sunrise. The work gloves on his hands were worn from years of use. His Navy work shirt carried grease stains that no detergent could completely remove. He knelt beside the machinery with a wrench in one hand and a flashlight in the other. The conveyor rattled loudly before finally coming back to life. "There you go," Daniel muttered. "You are welcome." A younger technician laughed. "You always talk to the machines." Daniel smiled. "They listen better than people." The younger man shook his head. "Fair point." Daniel stood and stretched his back. 12 hours on his feet could make anyone feel older than they really were. His phone vibrated inside his pocket. He immediately checked the screen. Emma. His expression changed instantly. Softer. Warmer. "Hey, kiddo." "Hi, Dad." Her cheerful voice filled the line. "Are you busy?" Daniel glanced at the conveyor. "Only pretending to work." Emma giggled. "Good. I wanted to tell you I got an A on my science project." Daniel smiled proudly. "I knew you would." And Mrs. Reynolds put it on display. "See? I told you all that hard work would pay off." Emma hesitated. "Dad, yeah. Are we still okay?" The question caught him off guard. Daniel knew exactly what she meant. Children always knew more than adults. Realized. He leaned against the wall and lowered his voice. "We are going to be fine. Promise." Daniel looked toward the concrete floor for a moment before answering. "I promise." Emma seemed satisfied. "Okay." Then she added something that made him smile. "Mom always said good things happen to good people eventually." Daniel laughed quietly. "Your mom said a lot of smart things." "I know." After the call ended, Daniel slipped the phone back into his pocket and returned to work. He had no idea that upstairs, dozens of people were talking about him. He had no idea that Navy officers were waiting. And he certainly had no idea that 3 days earlier, one simple act of kindness inside this very airport had set everything in motion. The truth was moving toward him already. Quietly, steadily, like a plane descending through clouds long before anyone on the ground can see it. 3 days earlier, before Navy officers arrived at Harbor City International Airport, and before anyone spoke Daniel Carter's name with curiosity, the airport looked exactly as it always did on a rainy Tuesday evening. Rolling suitcases rattled across polished floors. Flight announcements echoed through the terminal every few minutes. Coffee shops remained crowded with tired travelers chasing delayed connections and fading energy. Outside, rain streaked down enormous glass windows while aircraft lights blinked through low clouds like distant stars. Daniel Carter finished tightening the final bolt on an aging service vehicle and checked his watch. 9:43 at night. His shift had technically ended 43 minutes earlier. Unfortunately, broken equipment rarely cared about schedules. He wiped grease from his hands with a faded shop towel and leaned against the maintenance cart for a moment. The exhaustion settled into his shoulders immediately. 12 hours of work could do that. Some days felt heavier than others. Today felt especially heavy. His phone vibrated. A message from his bank appeared on the screen. Daniel opened it and quietly sighed. The balance was smaller than he hoped. Smaller than he expected. Certainly smaller than he needed. Mortgage payment due next week. Utility bill due in 4 days. School expenses for Emma arriving soon. He slipped the phone back into his pocket before the numbers could steal any more peace from his evening. Across the maintenance corridor, another technician noticed his expression. Everything okay? Daniel smiled automatically. Of course. The technician laughed. That is usually how people answer when things are definitely not okay. Daniel shrugged. Still breathing. Fair enough. The younger man gathered his tools and headed toward the employee exit. See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. Soon Daniel was alone. The airport always changed after 9 o'clock. The crowds became smaller. The noise softened. Conversations faded into distant echoes. Somehow the building felt larger at night. More reflective. More honest. Daniel grabbed his lunch bag and headed toward the employee break area. Inside rested a turkey sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water. Not much, but enough. He sat beside a window overlooking one of the runways. Rain tapped gently against the glass. A departing aircraft accelerated into the darkness before disappearing into the clouds. Daniel watched until the lights vanished completely. His phone rang again. This time it was Emma. He smiled immediately. Hey, sweetheart. Hi, Dad. Her voice sounded cheerful despite the late hour. Did I wake you? No, Emma laughed. You forget I know your schedule. Good point. How is work? Daniel glanced around the nearly empty break room. Busy. How busy? Airport busy. Emma giggled. That sounds serious. Daniel smiled. Hearing her laugh always helped. How was your evening? I finished my homework. Good. And I made spaghetti. Daniel raised his eyebrows. Without setting anything on fire? Dad, just checking. Emma laughed again. Then her voice softened. Mom used to say something. Daniel already knew what was coming. What was that? She said hard seasons do not last forever. Daniel stared through the rain-covered glass. Your mom was usually right. I think she still is. After the call ended, Daniel sat quietly for several moments. The airport lights reflected against wet pavement outside. Somewhere overhead, an announcement informed passengers of a delayed flight. A cleaning crew pushed equipment across the terminal floor. Life continued moving forward. Yet the loneliness of the evening remained. Daniel missed his wife most during quiet moments. Not because he needed rescuing. Not because he could not function without her. But because some people leave behind a warmth that never truly disappears. Even years later. He opened his lunch bag and looked down at the sandwich. Then he looked back toward the terminal. Travelers moved past one another carrying worries nobody else could see. Business executives. Young families. College students. Retirees. Everyone going somewhere. Everyone hoping for something. Daniel had spent enough years around airports to learn a simple truth. Sometimes the most lost people were not the ones missing their flights. They were the ones carrying burdens nobody else noticed. A distant thunderstorm flashed beyond the runway. Rain intensified against the windows. Daniel stood and gathered his things. Time to head home. Time to sleep. Time to do it all again tomorrow. Yet as he stepped into the nearly empty concourse, something unusual caught his attention. Near the far end of Terminal C, a woman stood completely alone beneath a departure board. She appeared calm on the surface, well-dressed, composed, yet something about her expression felt different. Not panic, not confusion, something quieter, as if she had been searching for an answer much longer than she had been searching for a gate. Several people walked past without slowing down. Airport employees hurried by carrying clipboards and radios. Nobody seemed to notice her. Daniel looked away and continued walking. After all, he had his own problems, his own responsibilities, his own long drive home waiting ahead. But after only a few steps, he found himself glancing back once more. And for reasons he could not explain, he suddenly had the feeling that this ordinary Tuesday night was about to become anything but ordinary. Daniel stood motionless for a few seconds after noticing the woman near the departure board. The sensible choice was obvious. Keep walking. Go home. Get some sleep. Wake up and do it all again tomorrow. Most people would have done exactly that. Yet something about her made him hesitate. She was not dressed like someone stranded. Her dark coat looked expensive. Her posture was composed. Even from a distance, she carried herself with quiet confidence. But her eyes told a different story. They carried the unmistakable look of someone searching for something she could not find. Daniel glanced toward the employee exit, then back toward the woman. Finally, he sighed and changed direction. 1 minute, he muttered. That is all. The terminal had grown quieter as the evening stretched closer to 10 o'clock. Several gates were already closed for the night. Cleaning crews moved through the concourse. A television mounted near a restaurant played muted news coverage that nobody seemed interested in watching. The woman remained standing beneath the glowing departure board. Daniel approached slowly. Excuse me. She turned toward him immediately. Her blue eyes were alert despite the exhaustion visible beneath them. Yes. Her voice was calm, polite. Daniel offered a small smile. Are you looking for a flight? The woman glanced toward the departure board and then back at him. At the moment, I am looking for several things. Daniel laughed softly. That sounds complicated. To his surprise, she smiled. It has been that kind of day. The tension in her expression eased slightly. Daniel noticed that she carried no luggage, no purse, no rolling suitcase, nothing except a small leather folder tucked beneath one arm. Can I help? He asked. The woman hesitated. Maybe. She looked around the terminal before continuing. My phone died several hours ago. That happens. My assistant was supposed to meet me. That happens too. The woman almost laughed. You are surprisingly calm about all of this. Daniel shrugged. I work at an airport. If I panicked every time something went wrong, I would never survive. The woman nodded thoughtfully. Fair point. They stood in silence for a moment. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. Somewhere nearby, an announcement informed passengers that boarding had begun for a flight to Denver. Daniel studied her expression. She seemed less worried about being stranded than about something else entirely. Something heavier. Have you been able to contact anyone? He asked. No. Do you know where you are staying tonight? The woman looked away briefly. Not yet. Daniel frowned. Harbor City was a large airport. Hotels filled quickly during bad weather. Delays could leave hundreds of travelers searching for rooms at the same time. That could be a problem. I am aware. Despite the words, she sounded almost amused. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out his employee identification badge. Come on. The woman looked confused. Come on where? Employee services desk. Why? Because they have charging stations. That's simple. Daniel smiled. Most problems usually are. For the first time, genuine warmth appeared in her expression. Together they walked through the nearly empty concourse. Their footsteps echoed softly across polished floors. Several airport employees greeted Daniel as they passed. He greeted each one by name. The woman seemed to notice. You know everyone here. Not everyone. Most of them. Daniel laughed. Occupational hazard. When they reached the employee services area, Daniel borrowed a charging cable and found an empty outlet. The woman's phone finally came back to life after several minutes. She stared at the screen as messages began arriving. One after another. Then another. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Busy day? The woman looked almost embarrassed. Something like that. Her phone continued vibrating. Daniel looked away to give her privacy. He opened his lunch bag and removed the sandwich he had not eaten earlier. The woman noticed immediately. You skipped dinner. Daniel glanced down at the sandwich. Apparently. You should eat. Daniel smiled. I probably should. Before taking a bite, his phone rang again. Emma. His face softened instantly. Excuse me. He answered immediately. Hey, sweetheart. The woman listened quietly while Daniel spoke with his daughter. She watched the exhaustion disappear from his face. She watched him ask about homework, ask about school, ask if she remembered to lock the front door. Every question carried patience. Every answer carried love. When the call ended, Daniel smiled to himself before putting the phone away. The woman had been watching. Your daughter? She asked. Yeah. You speak about her like she is the most important person in the world. Daniel looked surprised. She is. The woman held his gaze for a moment. Something changed in her expression then. Something thoughtful, almost emotional. Outside the windows, rain continued falling across the runway lights. Inside the quiet terminal, neither of them realized that a conversation which seemed ordinary would soon change both of their lives in ways neither could possibly imagine. The woman looked down at the phone resting in her hands while new messages continued arriving one after another. The screen illuminated her face with a soft glow. For a brief moment, she seemed far away. Not physically, emotionally, as though the small device had suddenly reconnected her to responsibilities she had been carrying for years. Daniel pretended not to notice. Respect was often less about what people said and more about what they chose not to ask. He sat across from her inside the employee services lounge and finally unwrapped his sandwich. The room was nearly empty now. A vending machine hummed quietly near the wall. Rain tapped against the windows. Somewhere beyond the hallway, an airport cleaning machine moved slowly across polished floors. The woman set her phone down and released a long breath. Good news? Daniel asked. She smiled faintly. That depends on your definition of good. Daniel laughed. That answer sounds familiar. Maybe I learned it from you. The tension between them eased slightly. For the first time all evening, she seemed genuinely relaxed. Daniel took a bite of his sandwich. So, he said, what happened? The woman looked at him. You mean tonight? Sure. She hesitated. A complicated travel day became a very complicated travel week. That bad? Worse. Daniel nodded sympathetically. Airports have a talent for that. The woman smiled. You really love this place, do you not? Daniel glanced around the room. Not always. Then why stay? He thought about that for a moment. Because people pass through here every day. And everyone is headed somewhere important. The woman seemed curious. That sounds optimistic. Daniel shrugged. Maybe. He looked out toward the rain-covered runway. Sometimes people are flying toward new jobs. Sometimes toward weddings. Sometimes toward family. He smiled softly. Sometimes toward second chances. The woman studied him carefully. There was no bitterness in his voice. No resentment. Despite everything life had taken from him, he still sounded hopeful. That interested her. And what about you? She asked. What about me? What are you headed toward? Daniel laughed quietly. Right now? Yes. Home. The woman smiled. I mean in life. Daniel leaned back in his chair. The question felt bigger than the room. Honestly, he considered the answer carefully. I think I am trying to become the kind of father my daughter deserves. The woman's expression softened immediately. Daniel continued. Everything else is secondary. Even your own goals. Especially my own goals. She looked surprised. Most people would not say that. Daniel smiled. Most people have not met Emma. The woman laughed quietly. The sound felt genuine. Warm. For a moment neither spoke. Rain continued falling outside. Aircraft lights reflected across wet pavement. The airport seemed suspended between arrivals and departures, between endings and beginnings. Finally, the woman asked another question. If someone offered you the chance to change your entire life tomorrow, what would you do? Daniel frowned slightly. That is a big question. I know. Do I get time to think about it? No, Daniel laughed. Then I would spend more time with my daughter. The answer arrived so quickly that even he seemed surprised. The woman noticed. Not more money. Money helps. Not a bigger house. Daniel shook his head. A bigger house is still empty if the people inside are unhappy. The woman remained silent. Not a better career? She asked. Daniel smiled. A better career would be nice. Then his expression softened. But Emma only gets one childhood. The room fell quiet again. The woman looked down for a moment. Something in his answer had affected her more than she expected. Daniel noticed, but did not mention it. Eventually, her phone vibrated once more. This time she glanced at the screen and nodded to herself. Looks like my transportation problem has been solved. Good. Someone is coming. Daniel smiled. Then my work here is done. The woman looked at him. You consider this work? Helping people is part of the job. I thought you repaired equipment. Daniel laughed. Mostly. The woman smiled. You are unusual, Daniel Carter. I have been called worse. Another laugh escaped her. Then her eyes drifted toward a small photograph sticking out of Daniel's wallet on the table. Emma's smiling face looked back at them. That is her. Daniel nodded proudly. That is Emma. The woman picked up the photograph gently. She looks happy. She is. Daniel paused. At least I hope she is. The woman stared at the picture for several seconds. Then something changed in her expression. Not sadness. Not nostalgia. Recognition. As though she suddenly understood something important about the man sitting across from her. She is lucky, the woman said quietly. Daniel looked surprised. To have me. Yes. He shook his head immediately. I think I am the lucky one. The woman smiled, but said nothing. Several minutes later, headlights appeared beyond the rain-covered windows near a restricted entrance outside the terminal. The woman noticed them immediately. Daniel followed her gaze. A dark vehicle had arrived. Then another. Then a third. Looks like your ride is here, he said. The woman stood slowly. Yet before leaving, she looked back at him one more time. And in that moment, Daniel had the strange feeling that she wanted to say something important, but had chosen not to. Not yet. The woman continued looking toward the dark vehicles waiting outside the restricted entrance. Rain flowed down the windows in silver streams, blurring the headlights into soft halos of light. For a few seconds she remained completely still. Then she looked back at Daniel. I suppose this is where we say goodbye. Daniel smiled. Looks that way. The woman glanced around the quiet employee lounge as though trying to memorize the moment. It seemed strange even to her. She had spent years moving from one responsibility to another, one city to another, one decision to another. Yet something about this ordinary conversation inside an airport felt unusually important. Daniel picked up his lunch bag and stood. Well, I am glad everything worked out. You are, she asked. Of course. Even though it kept you here longer? Daniel laughed softly. Trust me, I have spent longer evenings doing less useful things. The woman smiled. You really believe helping people matters, do you not? Daniel shrugged. Someone helped me once. Who? The answer came immediately. My wife. The woman's expression softened. Daniel looked toward the rain-covered runway beyond the windows. She spent her whole life helping people. And she believed kindness was never wasted. The woman listened carefully. Daniel rarely spoke about his wife to strangers. Yet somehow the words felt natural. After she passed away, he continued quietly. I spent a long time wondering if she was right. What do you think now? Daniel smiled. I think she was smarter than I was. The woman laughed gently. That answer sounds familiar too. Another silence settled between them. Not awkward. Comfortable. The kind of silence shared by people who no longer felt like strangers. Then the woman surprised him. Can I ask one last question? Sure. Are you happy? Daniel blinked. Of all the questions he expected, that was not one of them. That depends. On what? Daniel considered the answer carefully. Some days are harder than others. That is not what I asked. He smiled. I noticed. The woman folded her arms. So, Daniel glanced at the photograph of Emma still resting on the table. I do not have much. I know. Life did not turn out the way I planned. Most lives do not. Daniel nodded. But every night my daughter knows she is loved. His smile grew warmer. That counts for a lot. The woman stared at him for several moments. Then she nodded slowly. Yes. Her voice was softer now. I think it does. Her phone vibrated again. This time she did not even look at it. Daniel noticed. You should probably answer that. Probably. Whoever is calling seems persistent. The woman laughed. That is one way to describe them. Outside, one of the vehicle doors opened. A figure stepped into the rain and waited patiently near the entrance. Daniel glanced toward the scene. Looks like they are worried about you. The woman followed his gaze. That tends to happen. Something about the way she said it made Daniel pause. For just a second, he felt as though there was an entire story hidden behind those words. A story she had chosen not to tell. But if years of fatherhood had taught him anything, it was that trust could not be rushed. People shared their burdens when they were ready, not before. The woman picked up her phone and leather folder. Then she reached into her coat pocket and removed a business card. Daniel expected a company logo or office number. Instead, She hesitated before sliding the card back into her pocket. Actually, she said, almost to herself, not yet. Daniel looked confused, but said nothing. The woman smiled. Some things are better discovered later. Mysterious answer. Occupational hazard. Daniel laughed. Fair point. Together they walked toward the restricted entrance. The airport corridors were nearly empty now. Their footsteps echoed softly beneath high ceilings. Cleaning crews continued working in the distance. A final departure announcement drifted through the terminal speakers. The day was ending. Outside the glass doors, the rain had finally begun to slow. The waiting vehicles remained motionless. The figure standing beside them immediately straightened when the woman approached. Daniel noticed the reaction. Respect. Immediate and unmistakable. Yet before he could think much about it, the woman turned toward him one final time. Thank you, Daniel. For what? She smiled. For treating me like a person. Daniel looked genuinely surprised. What else would I treat you like? For a moment, emotion flickered across her face. Real emotion. The kind people usually worked hard to hide. You would be surprised, she said quietly. Then she extended her hand. Daniel shook it. Her grip was firm, confident, familiar somehow. Take care of yourself, he said. And you take care of Emma. Daniel blinked. I never told you her name. The woman smiled. You did. Then she nodded toward the photograph still visible inside his wallet. Several times. Daniel laughed. That sounds like me. The woman stepped backward toward the waiting vehicles. Goodbye, Daniel Carter. Goodbye. He watched as she entered the middle vehicle. Moments later, the small convoy pulled away from the terminal and disappeared into the rainy night. Daniel stood alone beneath the entrance canopy for several seconds. Then he turned and headed toward the employee parking lot. He believed the evening was over. He believed he would never see the woman again. What he did not know was that before sunrise, conversations would begin taking place in offices he had never heard of. And at the center of every conversation would be one simple question. Who exactly was Daniel Carter? Daniel arrived home shortly after midnight. The rain had followed him most of the way across the city, turning streetlights into long streaks of gold and silver across the windshield. His aging pickup truck rattled into the driveway of a modest two-bedroom house tucked inside a quiet neighborhood. Most of the homes were dark. Porch lights glowed softly against wet sidewalks. The entire street seemed asleep. Daniel sat behind the steering wheel for a moment before stepping out into the cool night air. Exhaustion settled over him again. Yet something about the evening remained in his thoughts. The woman, the conversation, the strange sense that there had been much more to her story than she allowed him to see. He unlocked the front door quietly. Emma had fallen asleep on the living room couch waiting for him. A blanket covered most of her small frame. A schoolbook rested open beside her. Daniel smiled immediately. No matter how difficult life became, moments like this always reminded him what mattered. He carefully picked up the book and placed it on the coffee table. Then he gently carried Emma to her bedroom. She stirred slightly as he tucked the blanket around her. Dad, she murmured sleepily. I am here. You are late. Daniel laughed softly. I noticed. Emma opened one eye. Long day. Very. Did anything interesting happen? Daniel paused. The image of the mysterious woman appeared in his mind again. Maybe. Emma smiled without fully waking. Good. Then she drifted back to sleep. Daniel stood quietly in the doorway for a moment before turning off the light. The house settled into silence. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed through the darkness. It should have been an ordinary ending to an ordinary day. Yet hundreds of miles away, events were already unfolding that would soon reach his front door. Inside a secure conference room overlooking a naval facility on the East Coast, several senior officers sat around a long table reviewing reports. Computer screens illuminated the room with pale blue light. Charts, flight schedules, operational summaries, names. The woman Daniel had helped sat at the far end of the table, no longer wearing a travel coat, no longer carrying herself like a stranded passenger. Her posture was precise, confident, commanding. Every person in the room listened when she spoke. Status update. One officer immediately responded. All units have reported in. Another slid a folder across the table. Transportation delays have been resolved. The woman nodded. Good. Then her attention shifted toward another document resting near her. A photograph had been attached to the top page. Daniel Carter, standing beside Emma at a school science fair. both smiling. The woman studied the image for several seconds. One of the officers noticed. Is that him? She nodded. Yes. The airport employee? Maintenance technician. The officer looked confused. May I ask why his file is included in this briefing? A faint smile touched her face. Because sometimes the most important people never appear on organizational charts. The room fell silent. No one questioned her further. They had worked with her too long to mistake kindness for weakness. Meanwhile, back in Harbor City, Daniel woke early the next morning. Life moved forward exactly as it always had. Coffee, bills, school lunches, traffic, responsibility. He dropped Emma off at school before heading back toward the airport. Along the way, he stopped at a gas station and checked his bank account again. The numbers had not magically improved overnight. Mortgage payment approaching. Utility bill pending. School expenses growing closer. Reality remained stubbornly unchanged. Daniel folded the receipt and slipped it into his pocket. One day at a time, he muttered. The airport greeted him with its usual rhythm. Arrivals, departures, rolling suitcases, security announcements, crowded gates. Nothing appeared unusual. Yet shortly after lunch, something happened that caught his attention. A black sedan pulled into a restricted parking area near one of the administrative buildings. Daniel would not normally have noticed. Airports received important visitors all the time. But what happened next felt different. Several senior airport executives emerged from the building almost immediately. They appeared nervous, respectful, alert, as though they had been expecting someone significant. Daniel watched from across the service road while carrying a toolbox toward another maintenance call. The sedan remained parked for less than 10 minutes. Then it departed. Strange, he thought. But life was too busy to spend much time wondering about it. Hours later, while repairing an escalator motor near Terminal A, Daniel's supervisor approached. Daniel. Yeah. Can I ask you something? Depends. The supervisor laughed. Do you know anyone important? Daniel immediately smiled. No, you sure? Pretty sure. The supervisor crossed his arms. Then why have 3 different people asked about you today? Daniel stopped working. What? One called Human Resources. Another asked about your schedule. He paused. And the third asked where you usually spend your lunch break. Daniel stared at him. Who were they? No idea. The supervisor shrugged. But they sounded official. For the first time since meeting the woman, Daniel felt something unexpected. Curiosity. Not fear. Not concern. Just a growing sense that whatever had begun inside that quiet airport lounge was far from over. And somewhere beyond the clouds, beyond the runways, beyond everything he could currently see, powerful people were already making plans that would soon change his life forever. The rest of the day passed in a blur of maintenance requests, equipment inspections, and unanswered questions. Daniel tried focusing on work, but his supervisor's comment stayed with him. 3 different people had asked about him. Not the maintenance department. Not airport operations. Him personally. It made no sense. Daniel was not a manager. He was not a public figure. He was simply a father trying to keep his life together one day at a time. Yet by late afternoon, the strange feeling had only grown stronger. He was repairing an automatic gate mechanism near Terminal D when another employee approached carrying a clipboard. Daniel. Yeah. There is someone asking for you at the administration office. Daniel frowned. Who? No idea. What do they want? The employee shrugged. They only asked if you still worked here. Daniel laughed softly. Last time I checked. The employee smiled and walked away. Daniel watched him leave before returning to the gate mechanism. But the questions remained. Outside the terminal windows, clouds drifted across a pale afternoon sky. Aircraft lined the taxiways. Travelers hurried toward departures. Life continued moving with its usual urgency. Yet somehow Daniel felt as though he were standing still while something larger moved quietly around him. Meanwhile, nearly 800 miles away, the woman sat inside a private office overlooking a naval harbor. Massive ships rested in the distance beneath a bright coastal sky. Tugboats moved slowly through the water. American flags shifted in the wind. The office itself was elegant but practical. Large maps covered one wall. Awards and photographs filled another. The atmosphere reflected decades of leadership and service. A senior aide entered carrying a folder. Ma'am. She looked up from her desk. Report. The aide handed over the file. Background review completed. She opened it immediately. The first page contained Daniel's employment history. The second detailed community volunteer activities. The third contained references from supervisors, co-workers, and neighbors. The woman read quietly. Occasionally she smiled. Occasionally she nodded. Finally, she reached the final page. A handwritten statement from Emma's school principal. She read every word. Then she closed the folder and sat back in silence. Interesting, the aide asked. The woman looked toward the harbor beyond the window. Very. Should we proceed? Her answer came without hesitation. Absolutely. Back in Harbor City, Daniel's shift finally ended shortly after 6 o'clock. He climbed into his pickup truck and headed toward Emma's school for a parent meeting. The school building stood only 15 minutes from the airport. Modest, welcoming, familiar. The kind of place where teachers knew students by name. Daniel arrived just before the meeting started. Parents gathered in hallways discussing schedules, grades, and upcoming activities. Emma spotted him immediately. Dad. She ran toward him carrying a folder filled with schoolwork. Daniel smiled. Hey, kiddo. You made it. I promised. Emma grinned. Good. During the meeting, teachers discussed academic progress and future programs. Most of it felt routine until the principal asked Daniel to stay afterward. Once the room emptied, she closed the door gently. Everything okay? Daniel asked. Of course. The principal smiled. Actually, I wanted to tell you something. She opened a folder and handed him several papers. Emma has been nominated for a regional academic scholarship program. Daniel blinked. Really? She is one of the strongest applicants we have ever submitted. Pride immediately filled his face. That is incredible. The principal nodded. She works very hard. Then her expression softened. A lot of that credit belongs to you. Daniel shook his head. No, yes. She smiled. Children notice more than we think. The words stayed with him long after the meeting ended. Later that evening, father and daughter stopped for inexpensive burgers on the drive home. Emma talked nonstop about science projects, reading assignments, and future plans. Daniel listened carefully to every word. The mortgage payment still worried him. Bills still waited. Uncertainty still existed. Yet moments like this made everything else feel smaller. Dad, Emma asked suddenly. Yeah. Do you think good things can happen for no reason? Daniel considered the question. I do not know. Mom always said kindness comes back eventually. Daniel smiled. Your mom said that a lot. Emma nodded. I think she was right. Daniel looked out the windshield at the fading sunset ahead of them. Orange lights stretched across the horizon. For a moment, he thought about the woman at the airport. The strange questions. The unusual visitors. The feeling that something unseen was slowly unfolding. Maybe she was, he said quietly. That night, after Emma went to bed, Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table reviewing bills once again. The numbers remained stubborn. The solutions remained unclear. Then his phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. He almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, he answered. Hello. The voice on the other end sounded professional. Calm. Respectful. Mr. Carter? Yes. My name is Commander Michael Reynolds. Daniel frowned. Okay. A brief pause followed. Then the man spoke words that instantly erased every trace of fatigue from Daniel's face. A senior officer would like to meet you in person. At the airport. Tomorrow morning. Daniel remained silent for several seconds after the caller finished speaking. The kitchen suddenly felt much quieter. The refrigerator hummed softly. Rain tapped against the window above the sink. Somewhere down the hallway, Emma slept peacefully, unaware that a strange phone call had just changed the direction of her father's evening. Mr. Carter? The voice asked again. Are you still there? Daniel blinked. Yes. Good. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Let me make sure I understand this. Of course. A senior officer wants to meet me? That is correct. Why? A brief pause followed. I believe that explanation would be better delivered in person. Daniel laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because nothing about the situation made sense anymore. Can you at least tell me who the officer is? I am afraid I cannot. That sounds mysterious. I suppose it does. Daniel stared at the stack of unpaid bills spread across the kitchen table. 24 hours earlier, his biggest concern had been a mortgage payment. Now he was receiving calls from military commanders. Life had developed a strange sense of humor. What time? He finally asked. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. At the airport? Yes, sir. Daniel sighed. All right. Thank you, Mr. Carter. The call ended. Daniel placed the phone on the table and sat quietly. The woman immediately came to mind. It had to be connected to her. Nothing else made sense. Yet even then, he could not imagine the truth. Nobody in his position could have. The next morning arrived beneath clear blue skies. The storm system that had covered Harbor City for days had finally moved offshore. Sunlight reflected from terminal windows. Aircraft climbed through bright morning air. Travelers filled the airport once again with rolling luggage, coffee cups, and hurried conversations. Daniel arrived early, mostly because he had barely slept. Questions had a way of doing that. He parked his truck and entered through the employee entrance. Almost immediately, he noticed something unusual. People were watching him. Not staring, not openly, but enough to notice. Conversations paused when he passed. Employees exchanged curious glances. One gate agent even smiled and waved. "Morning, Daniel." "Morning. Big day." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" The gate agent laughed nervously. "Nothing." That was not reassuring. By 8:45, rumors had spread across nearly every department in the airport. Nobody knew what was happening. Everyone had a theory. Some thought Daniel had received an award. Others believed he had done something heroic. A few assumed there had been some kind of mistake. Daniel preferred that explanation. At least mistakes made sense. Shortly before 9 o'clock, his supervisor appeared. "Ready? For what?" "You have a meeting." Daniel laughed. "Apparently." Together they walked toward a private conference room overlooking one of the runways. The room itself was simple. Large windows, long table, several chairs. Nothing remarkable. Yet as Daniel approached, he immediately noticed two men standing outside the door. Dark suits, professional posture, serious expressions. Neither looked like airport employees. One of them stepped forward. "Mr. Carter?" "Yes." The man nodded respectfully. "Thank you for coming." Daniel glanced at the closed conference room door. "Am I allowed to know what this is about yet?" The man smiled slightly. "In a moment." He opened the door. Daniel stepped inside, then stopped. The room was empty. Completely empty. No officers. No executives. No mysterious visitors. Just a sealed envelope resting at the center of the table. Daniel looked back toward the doorway. "Seriously?" The suited man smiled. "Please read it." Then he quietly closed the door behind him. Daniel stood alone in the room. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Aircraft moved slowly across the tarmac below. He approached the table and picked up the envelope. His name had been written across the front in neat handwriting. Daniel Carter. The handwriting felt familiar. Carefully, he opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded note. He unfolded it and began reading. "Daniel, if you are reading this, then I owe you an apology. I am afraid I was not entirely honest when we met." Daniel immediately recognized the handwriting. His heart skipped. He continued reading. "You helped me when you had no reason to. You trusted me without knowing who I was. You treated me with dignity when you believed I was simply a traveler having a difficult day. For that, I will always be grateful." Daniel sat down slowly. The note continued. "In a few hours, several people are going to tell you things that may seem impossible. Before they do, there is something I want you to remember. The most important thing about our meeting was never who I am. It was who you chose to be." Daniel stared at the page. The airport noise seemed distant now, almost unreal. Then he reached the final line. "Please meet me at Terminal B at noon. I believe it is time we finish our conversation. Victoria Hayes." Daniel looked up slowly. For the first time, he finally knew her name. What he did not know was that by noon, the entire airport would know it too. Daniel read the note 3 more times before finally folding it and slipping it into his pocket. Victoria Hayes. The name meant nothing to him. Yet somehow it felt important. Not because of status. Not because of influence. Because of the sincerity behind every word she had written. "The most important thing about our meeting was never who I am. It was who you chose to be." Those words stayed with him throughout the morning. Outside the conference room, airport life continued as usual. Boarding calls echoed through the terminal. Travelers hurried between gates. Service carts moved along restricted corridors. Yet Daniel felt as though he were walking through a completely different world than everyone else. By 10 o'clock, curiosity had spread throughout the airport. Employees who normally never paid attention to maintenance staff suddenly seemed interested in Daniel's schedule. People smiled at him more than usual. Some nodded respectfully. Others simply stared. Daniel wished he understood why. He spent the next hour trying to focus on work. It was not easy. Every time he checked his watch, noon seemed impossibly far away. Eventually, even his supervisor noticed. You are distracted. Daniel laughed. That obvious? Very. I have no idea what is happening. His supervisor nodded. Neither does anyone else. Good. Actually, it is making everyone nervous. Daniel smiled despite himself. Glad I could help. The older man laughed. Then his expression became more serious. Whatever this is, Daniel, I hope it turns out well. Daniel appreciated that, more than he realized. Shortly before noon, he headed toward Terminal B. The terminal was one of the airport's busiest sections. Large windows overlooked multiple runways. Restaurants filled the center concourse. Travelers crowded departure areas carrying backpacks, briefcases, and coffee cups. Everything appeared completely normal. Yet something felt different. Security personnel stood near several entrances. Additional airport administrators were visible throughout the area. A few people carried earpieces. Daniel noticed immediately. Okay, he muttered. Now it is getting strange. As he approached the central seating area, a familiar voice called his name. Daniel. He turned. The same man who had introduced himself as Commander Michael Reynolds was walking toward him. Unlike their phone conversation, this meeting felt very real. The commander's uniform was immaculate. His posture reflected decades of discipline. Yet his smile seemed genuine. Mr. Carter. Daniel extended his hand. Commander. They shook hands. Thank you for coming. Daniel laughed softly. At this point, I think curiosity left me with very little choice. The commander smiled. Fair enough. They began walking through the terminal together. Travelers moved around them without noticing. Most had no idea anything unusual was happening. Can you tell me what this is about now? Daniel asked. Commander Reynolds looked ahead. In a few minutes. Everyone keeps saying that. There is a reason. Daniel sighed. I figured. They stopped near a large observation window overlooking the runways. Aircraft taxied across the bright pavement beneath a clear blue sky. Sunlight reflected off glass and metal everywhere. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel noticed something unusual outside. Several dark vehicles were entering a restricted section of the airport. Not one vehicle. Not two. Several. Their movement was organized. Deliberate. Professional. Daniel felt his stomach tighten slightly. Those are connected to this, are they not? Commander Reynolds followed his gaze. Yes. Who exactly is Victoria Hayes? The commander looked at him. A faint smile appeared. That is a very interesting question. Daniel crossed his arms. And, before the commander could answer, activity throughout the terminal suddenly changed. Security personnel adjusted their positions. Airport executives appeared near the concourse entrance. Conversations quieted. People began noticing. Travelers slowed down. Employees looked toward the far end of the terminal. Something important was happening. Daniel turned. A small group was approaching through the concourse. Men and women in formal military uniforms moved with calm confidence. There was nothing theatrical about their presence. Nothing intimidating. Yet respect seemed to follow them naturally. Travelers stepped aside without being asked. Conversations faded. Even the noise of the terminal seemed to soften. Daniel watched the group approach. Then he saw her. For a moment, he genuinely thought he was mistaken. The woman from the airport lounge could not possibly be the same person walking toward him now. Yet she was. Victoria Hayes moved through the terminal wearing a formal naval uniform decorated with insignia and ribbons. Daniel did not understand. Her posture was the same. Her eyes were the same. Her calm smile was the same. But everything else had changed. The stranded traveler had disappeared. In her place stood someone carrying immense responsibility. Commander Reynolds noticed Daniel's expression. Now, he said quietly, you are beginning to understand. Daniel could only stare. Victoria stopped several feet away and smiled warmly. The same smile she had given him during their conversation days earlier. Hello, Daniel. His mind searched desperately for words. Victoria. She nodded. Good to see you again. Daniel looked at the uniform, then at the officers surrounding her, then back at her. I think there is a part of this story you forgot to mention. For the first time since arriving, Victoria laughed. And around them, an entire airport prepared to learn exactly who she really was. For several seconds, Daniel simply stared at Victoria Hayes. The terminal around them continued functioning normally. Flights departed. Announcements echoed through overhead speakers. Travelers hurried toward gates. Yet for Daniel, the entire world seemed to narrow to one simple realization. The woman he had helped a few nights earlier was not who he thought she was. Victoria noticed his expression and smiled gently. I know. Daniel laughed softly. No, I do not think you do. Several officers nearby smiled discreetly. Commander Reynolds folded his hands behind his back and remained silent. This moment clearly belonged to someone else. Victoria took a step closer. You look surprised. That may be the understatement of the year. Her smile widened. Fair enough. Daniel glanced toward the rows of ribbons and insignia displayed on her uniform. You definitely left out a few details. Quite a few. Apparently. For a moment neither spoke. Then Victoria nodded toward a quieter seating area overlooking the runway. Walk with me. Daniel hesitated. Do I have a choice? Not really. That made him laugh again. Together, they moved through the terminal while several officers followed at a respectful distance. Travelers occasionally looked up from phones and newspapers. Some recognized that something unusual was happening. Most simply continued on their way. They eventually stopped near the observation windows. Bright sunlight reflected from aircraft parked at nearby gates. A passenger jet slowly pushed back from the terminal. The scene felt strangely ordinary considering the circumstances. Victoria folded her hands in front of her. First, I owe you an apology. Daniel looked surprised. For what? For allowing you to believe I was simply a traveler having a difficult day. Daniel shrugged. You were a traveler having a difficult day. Victoria smiled. That is true. And honestly, I never asked. Her expression softened. No, you did not. A brief silence followed. Then Daniel asked the question everyone seemed determined to avoid answering directly. So who are you? Victoria looked out the window for a moment. When she finally spoke, her voice remained calm. I serve as the commanding admiral overseeing the largest operational naval fleet in the United States. Daniel blinked once, then twice. The largest? Yes. As in, he gestured vaguely. Ships. Quite a few ships. Aircraft. Quite a few aircraft. Daniel stared at her. And nobody thought that was important information? Victoria laughed. A genuine laugh. Warm and surprisingly ordinary. At the time, I was more interested in seeing how people treated someone they believed had nothing to offer them. The answer settled between them. Daniel understood immediately. He remembered the employees who had walked past her. The travelers who never stopped. The conversations they shared. The sandwich he almost ate himself. Victoria continued. Most people saw inconvenience. Her eyes met his. You saw a person. Daniel looked away for a moment. I did not do anything special. Several nearby officers exchanged knowing glances. Victoria noticed. That statement explains everything. What does that mean? She asked. It means the people who make the biggest difference rarely realize they are doing it. Daniel shook his head. I bought coffee. You offered dignity. I helped charge a phone. You offered respect. I listened for a while. Victoria smiled. Exactly. Daniel had no response to that. Outside the window, another aircraft climbed into the blue afternoon sky. Sunlight reflected from its wings before it disappeared into distant clouds. Victoria watched it for a moment. Then her expression became more thoughtful. Do you remember something you said that night? Daniel laughed. Probably not. You said that if someone offered you the chance to change your life tomorrow, you would spend more time being a good father. Daniel remembered immediately. Yeah. Victoria nodded slowly. Most people answer questions like that differently. Maybe. Most people ask for more money. Money is useful. Most people ask for more status. Daniel smiled. Status never helped anyone with homework. For a second, Victoria simply looked at him. Then she shook her head and laughed softly. That answer is exactly why we are here. Daniel frowned. We? Victoria glanced toward the officers standing nearby, then toward the airport executives quietly observing from a distance. Everyone involved in this meeting. I am still missing part of the story. I know. Victoria took a slow breath. When I returned to duty, I could not stop thinking about our conversation. Daniel looked surprised. Really? Really? She smiled. You reminded me of something important. What is that? Her answer came immediately. Why service matters. The words hung quietly between them. Not dramatic. Not exaggerated. Honest. Around them, the airport continued moving at its usual pace. Yet more people had begun noticing. Airport employees gathered discreetly near nearby gates. Managers stood along the concourse. Questions spread rapidly. Nobody understood exactly what was happening, but everyone sensed they were witnessing something significant. Victoria looked around the terminal before turning back to Daniel. In a few minutes, there is something I would like to say publicly. Daniel immediately looked uncomfortable. Publicly? Yes. I was afraid you were going to say that. Victoria smiled. Trust me. Her eyes carried the same warmth he remembered from the lounge. After today, nobody here will ever forget your name. Daniel immediately shook his head. That is not necessary. Victoria smiled knowingly. That response does not surprise me. Around them, more airport employees had gathered near the edge of the concourse. Some pretended to be working. Others made no effort to hide their curiosity. Word had spread far beyond Terminal B. Maintenance crews, gate agents, airline supervisors, baggage handlers, and customer service representatives all wanted answers. The airport had never seen anything quite like this. Daniel noticed the growing crowd and felt increasingly uncomfortable. He had spent years avoiding attention. The last thing he wanted was to become the center of it. Victoria seemed to understand. Relax. Easy for you to say. Why? Daniel gestured toward her uniform. Because people expect attention when they see you. Victoria looked around the terminal. You would be surprised. Before Daniel could respond, one of the airport executives approached. Admiral Hayes. The title instantly caught the attention of several nearby travelers. The executive nodded respectfully. Everything is prepared. Victoria thanked him. Daniel noticed the executive's expression. It was not fear. It was admiration. Respect earned over many years. Victoria turned back toward Daniel. Would you walk with me? Daniel sighed dramatically. I have a feeling I am not escaping this. You are correct. Together, they moved toward a small presentation area near the center of the terminal. Airport staff had quietly arranged several portable microphones and a modest platform. Nothing excessive, nothing theatrical, yet the purpose was obvious. People were gathering. Travelers slowed their pace. Families paused beside restaurant entrances. Employees emerged from nearby offices. Curiosity pulled everyone closer. Daniel glanced toward the crowd and muttered, "This is getting worse." Victoria laughed softly. "That depends on your perspective." Commander Reynolds joined them near the platform. "Everything is ready, Admiral." "Thank you, Commander." Daniel looked at him. "Nobody is going to make me give a speech, right?" "No, good. However," the commander added with a smile, "you may be mentioned." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "Of course I will." A few minutes later, the crowd had doubled in size. Airport operations continued normally, but a noticeable pocket of attention had formed around the presentation area. Sunlight streamed through massive windows overlooking the runway. Aircraft moved in the distance like silent giants. The atmosphere felt strangely calm. Victoria stepped onto the platform. The conversations immediately began fading. One by one, people turned their attention toward her. Daniel remained near the front, wishing he could somehow disappear into the floor. Victoria waited patiently until the terminal grew quiet. Then she began speaking. "Good afternoon." Her voice carried confidence without arrogance. "I appreciate everyone allowing me a few moments of your time." More travelers stopped to listen. Airport employees exchanged curious glances. Victoria continued. "A few nights ago, I arrived at this airport during a difficult travel situation." She smiled slightly. "Unfortunately, I was separated from important resources, communication became complicated, and for several hours I found myself relying on the kindness of strangers." Daniel immediately noticed that she was carefully protecting sensitive details. The explanation sounded reasonable, professional, realistic. Victoria looked across the crowd. Most people were busy. Understandably so. Airports are complicated places. Everyone has responsibilities. Her eyes eventually found Daniel. But one person stopped. The crowd followed her gaze. Daniel suddenly wished he had called in sick that morning. Victoria continued. One person offered assistance without asking for anything in return. The terminal grew even quieter. One person shared his time despite having very little of it. One person treated a stranger with dignity, respect, and simple human kindness. Daniel looked down at the floor. He could practically feel hundreds of eyes turning toward him. Victoria's voice softened. "The remarkable part is that he never once asked who I was." A few people smiled. Others nodded. Victoria continued. "He did not help because of a title. He did not help because of rank. He did not help because he expected a reward." Her expression became more emotional. He helped because he believed it was the right thing to do. Silence settled across the terminal. Even the surrounding noise seemed quieter. Daniel slowly looked up. Victoria was still watching him. In my profession, she said, people often discuss leadership. They discuss responsibility. They discuss service. She paused. Yet sometimes the best example of service comes from someone wearing a maintenance uniform instead of a military one. The crowd remained completely still. Several airport employees looked visibly moved. Others appeared stunned. Daniel himself did not know what to say. Victoria stepped down from the platform and approached him directly. Daniel Carter, she said clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Thank you for reminding me that character matters more than status. The terminal fell into a level of silence that was almost impossible to describe. And in that silence, something changed. For the first time, everyone gathered there stopped seeing Daniel as merely the maintenance technician they passed every day. They began seeing the man he had quietly been all along. For several seconds after Victoria spoke, nobody moved. The terminal remained wrapped in a quiet stillness that felt almost impossible inside one of the busiest airports in the region. Travelers stood beside rolling suitcases. Airline employees remained frozen near ticket counters. Even the airport executives seemed unsure whether they should speak. Daniel wished the floor would open beneath him. Recognition had never been something he sought. He had spent years working behind the scenes, fixing problems most people never noticed. Yet standing there beneath the afternoon sunlight, he could feel an entire airport seeing him differently. Victoria smiled gently, sensing his discomfort. You look like you want to run away. Daniel laughed softly. That is because I do. Several people nearby laughed with him. The tension eased immediately. Victoria turned back toward the crowd. There is one more thing I would like everyone here to know. The terminal quieted again. Her expression became thoughtful. Many people assume kindness comes from having extra time, extra money, or extra resources. She shook her head. That is rarely true. Her eyes found Daniel once more. The people who show the greatest kindness are often the people carrying the heaviest burdens. Daniel looked down. Victoria continued. When I met Daniel, he was not enjoying an easy season of life. The crowd listened carefully. He had responsibilities, financial pressures, long work hours, a daughter depending on him. Several airport employees exchanged surprised looks. They knew pieces of Daniel's story. Few knew the whole picture. Victoria smiled. Yet despite everything on his shoulders, he still stopped to help a stranger. Silence settled again. It was not dramatic silence. It was reflective silence. The kind that makes people reconsider things they normally overlook. Victoria then glanced toward Commander Reynolds, who stepped forward carrying a slim folder. Daniel immediately became suspicious. I do not like that folder. Victoria laughed. You have not even seen what is inside. That is exactly why I do not like it. More laughter spread through the crowd. Commander Reynolds handed the folder to Victoria. She opened it briefly before looking back at Daniel. A few days ago, while reviewing your background, we learned something else. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That sounds concerning. Not at all. Victoria removed several documents. We learned that your daughter has recently been nominated for an academic scholarship program. Daniel blinked. How do you know that? Because remarkable young people attract attention. A warm smile crossed her face. Just like remarkable parents. Daniel immediately shook his head. Emma earned that herself. I know, Victoria replied. Which is why I would like you to tell her something tonight. Daniel frowned slightly. Tell her what? Victoria held up the documents. Tell her that a leadership foundation supporting military families and community education has decided to fully sponsor her scholarship application process and future academic enrichment programs if she is selected. For a second, Daniel genuinely thought he had misunderstood. Around him, surprised murmurs moved through the crowd. Airport employees exchanged stunned looks. Daniel stared at Victoria. You are serious? Very. Daniel struggled to find words. Victoria, that is, he stopped. Emotion caught him completely off guard. Victoria smiled softly. That is for Emma. Daniel swallowed hard and nodded. Thank you. Do not thank me. Why not? Because this was not my idea. She nodded toward Commander Reynolds. The recommendation came from people who reviewed your story. Several officers smiled. Daniel looked overwhelmed. Then Victoria reached into the folder once more. There is also another item. Daniel immediately laughed. There is always another item. Victoria nodded. Usually. She handed him a separate envelope. A private aviation logistics company that works closely with several federal agencies recently reviewed your professional qualifications. Daniel stared at the envelope. Why? Because someone suggested they should. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. After reviewing your experience, they would like to invite you to interview for a regional operations leadership position. Daniel looked completely stunned. An interview? Only an interview. Victoria smiled. The rest depends on you. Daniel exhaled slowly. That made the offer feel real. Earned. Honest. Not a gift. An opportunity. The crowd began applauding softly. Then more people joined. Soon the entire terminal seemed filled with applause. Yet what affected Daniel most was not the scholarship support, not the interview opportunity, not even the recognition itself. It was the expression on Victoria's face. Because standing there in full uniform, surrounded by officers and executives, she looked less proud of her own accomplishments than she did of a maintenance technician who had once shared a conversation and a little kindness with a stranger. And as the applause continued echoing through Terminal B, Daniel finally understood why she had come back. Not to repay a favor, not to reward a good deed, but to prove that character still mattered in a world that often forgot to notice it. The applause continued for several moments before gradually fading into something even more meaningful. Respect. The kind that could not be requested, purchased, or manufactured. It could only be earned. Daniel stood quietly near the center of Terminal B, holding the envelope in one hand and the scholarship documents in the other. Around him, hundreds of people were beginning to return to their routines. Flights still needed boarding. Bags still needed loading. Travelers still had destinations waiting for them. Yet something had shifted, not only in the airport, in the people themselves. Victoria watched the crowd disperse slowly. Then she turned toward Daniel. "How are you holding up?" Daniel laughed softly. "I think I am still trying to figure out what happened." "That is fair. A week ago I was fixing conveyor belts." Victoria smiled. "And today?" Daniel looked around the terminal. "Today I apparently became part of a Navy operation." That made her laugh. Several nearby officers smiled as well. The atmosphere felt lighter now, more personal, less formal. For a few minutes, they simply stood together near the observation windows. Sunlight poured across the polished floor. Beyond the glass, aircraft lifted into the afternoon sky one after another. Victoria eventually looked toward the runway. "You know something?" Daniel shook his head. "What?" "The night we met, I was having one of the worst weeks of my career." Daniel seemed surprised. "Really? Really?" She folded her hands. "Leadership can be lonely sometimes." Daniel nodded. He understood more than she expected. People assume responsibility gets easier when you become successful. It does not. No, Victoria smiled faintly. Sometimes it gets harder. They stood in silence for a moment. Then she continued. "I had spent days dealing with problems, schedules, reports, and decisions." Her eyes drifted toward the runway. "Then I met someone who reminded me why service exists in the first place." Daniel immediately shook his head. "Victoria, it is true. I bought coffee. You showed character. I charged a phone. You showed respect." Daniel laughed. "You really are not going to let that go, are you?" "Never." The answer came instantly. Both smiled. A few minutes later, Victoria glanced at her watch. "I should probably leave." Daniel nodded slowly. Somehow he had known that moment was coming. "Back to saving the world?" Victoria laughed. "Something like that." "Good luck." "Thank you." Then she looked at him carefully. "And good luck with the interview." Daniel smiled. "I will do my best." That is all anyone can do. Nearby, Commander Reynolds quietly informed the officers that it was time to depart. The group began organizing themselves near the terminal entrance. Travelers watched with curiosity. Airport employees watched with admiration. Daniel assumed the moment was over. He assumed the story had reached its conclusion. Then Victoria surprised him one final time. She stepped back several feet. The officers around her immediately became still. The terminal seemed to grow quieter once again. Daniel frowned. "Victoria?" She looked directly at him. "There is one more thing." Before he could respond, she straightened her posture. Every officer nearby did the same. Commander Reynolds turned toward Daniel. So did the others. Travelers paused. Airport employees stopped moving. Conversations faded. Then, in full view of everyone inside Terminal B, Victoria Hayes raised her hand in a formal salute. A salute offered not to a politician, not to a celebrity, not to a powerful executive, A salute offered to a struggling single father who had simply chosen kindness when nobody was watching. The silence that followed seemed to stretch across the entire terminal. No announcements, no conversations, no movement, only stillness. Daniel stood frozen. Emotion caught him completely by surprise. He slowly nodded in return. Nothing else needed to be said. Victoria lowered her hand. The officers followed. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then, quietly, respectfully, people began applauding once more. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to acknowledge a moment they would never forget. Later that evening, Daniel arrived home carrying the envelope and documents. Emma met him at the front door. "Dad," he smiled. "You are never going to believe this story." An hour later, they sat together at the kitchen table reviewing scholarship information. Emma's eyes grew wider with every page. "This is real." Daniel nodded. "Very real." Emma looked up at him. "Mom was right." Daniel smiled softly. "About what?" "Good things happen to good people eventually." For a moment, he thought about the airport, the conversation, the salute, the stranger who was never really a stranger. Then he looked at his daughter, the person who mattered most. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but I think the real lesson is something else." Emma tilted her head. "What?" Daniel smiled. "Be kind anyway." Outside, the evening sun settled beyond the horizon. Airplanes crossed the sky above the neighborhood. Somewhere in the distance, people continued rushing toward destinations and deadlines and responsibilities. But inside that small house, peace had finally arrived. And far away, aboard ships and inside command centers and across countless miles of ocean, a naval leader carried with her the memory of one ordinary father who reminded her that dignity, grace, and respect still mattered. Because sometimes the most powerful people in the world are not the ones who command fleets. Sometimes they are the ones who quietly choose kindness when nobody expects it. And sometimes that is enough to make an entire world stop and listen.